the trauma bay doors burst open hard enough to shake the hallway windows. Two paramedics stumbled inside, pushing a blood-covered police officer while alarms screamed across the emergency wing. Behind them, patients were already crying. Nurses moved fast between stretchers. Security radios crackled with overlapping voices nobody could understand. At the center of the chaos, a quiet trauma nurse stood perfectly still beside the medication counter. Blue scrubs, no rank, no panic. She watched the automatic entrance doors lock one by one, then the first gunshot echoed through the hospital lobby. Everyone dropped, doctors shouted. A child started screaming somewhere near radiology. Another gunshot. Closer this time, the charge nurse grabbed the quiet nurse by the arm. "Get downstairs with the patients, now." But the woman did not move. Her eyes stayed fixed on the security monitor, mounted above the hallway. 3 masked gunmen. Military movement. Stack. Formation. Not amateurs. And for the first time that night, the calm trauma nurse looked afraid. Not for herself, for everyone else. Because the men entering the emergency wing were trained, and they had no idea who was already inside waiting for them. Rain pressed softly against the high emergency room windows. The city had been under storm warning since late afternoon, and by midnight the hospital had settled into the strange rhythm that came with bad weather. More accidents, more overdoses, more exhausted people trying not to fall apart under fluorescent lights. Inside St. Gabriel Medical Center's emergency wing, nothing ever became fully quiet. Monitors beeped, wheels rattled across tile floors, phones rang unanswered, for several seconds at a time before another tired hand picked them up. The night shift had already lost 2 beds upstairs, 1 trauma surgeon, and half the security staff to a disturbance somewhere downtown. Nobody seemed surprised anymore. At the far end of Trauma Bay 3, Lena Vale adjusted an IV line without speaking. Her movements were economical, controlled. No. Wasted motion. A young intern stood beside her, holding a chart against his chest. "You already knew he was crashing," he said quietly. Lena looked at the patient instead of him. The man on the bed was pale beneath the oxygen mask. Sweat gathered along his forehead. His pulse monitor climbed unevenly. "He stopped responding to pain 20 seconds before the monitor changed," she replied. The intern frowned. "You noticed that?" "Lena secured the line. He told us." The intern glanced at the unconscious patient, confused. Then Lena walked away before he could ask another question. Most people in the emergency wing viewed her the same way. Competent, cold, difficult to read. She had worked trauma for almost 3 years, yet very few people knew anything about her outside the hospital. No stories about family. No photos in her locker. No after-shift drinks with the others. She arrived on time, did her work, left quietly. That was all. Near the central station, 2 nurses spoke in lowered voices while sorting medication trays. "She barely sleeps," one whispered. "I heard she used to work military." Nobody from military moves like that. The other nurse glanced toward Lena. "She barely even talks." Lena passed them carrying fresh supplies. Neither woman continued the conversation. Not because she looked angry, because she somehow always heard everything. At 12:43 a.m., the ambulance doors opened again. Paramedics rushed in, pushing a teenager covered in blood from a motorcycle. Collision. The emergency wing immediately shifted. Gears. Doctors moved orders. Snapped across the room. Machines rolled into place. Lena stepped beside the incoming stretcher, while another nurse explained the injuries. Possible spinal trauma. Blood pressure unstable. He coded once in transport. The teenager's mother stumbled behind the paramedics, crying uncontrollably. "Please save him. Please." Lena caught the mother gently before she collapsed. "Ma'am," she said calmly. "Look at me." The woman's breathing broke apart into panic. Lena lowered her voice further. "Your son is alive right now. Stay standing for him. Not comforting, not emotional, steady." The woman grabbed onto that steadiness immediately. Within seconds, Lena guided her into a chair beside the wall and signaled another nurse to stay with her. Then she returned to the trauma bed. A doctor cursed under his breath. "We're losing pressure. Lena's Eyes moved once across the room. Monitor, blood, lost breathing pattern position of the chest wound. Left side is filling, she said. The surgeon froze, then checked. A collapsed lung. The room accelerated again. No one questioned her after that. They simply moved. Minutes later, the teenager stabilized. The surgeon removed his gloves and looked toward Lena across the trauma bay. You catch that from the scan? Lena cleaned blood from her hands. No. Then how? She paused. His shoulder stopped compensating. The surgeon stared at her for a second longer than normal. Then another emergency call interrupted the moment. By 1:30 a.m., exhaustion settled heavily across the wing. Coffee cups gathered near computer terminals. Patients lined the hallway waiting for beds upstairs. Security guards moved slower now, distracted by constant radio traffic from outside. Something major was happening in the city. Nobody had clear details yet, only fragments armed. Robbery. Shots fired, officers injured. Possible suspects still moving. The televisions, mounted near the waiting area, played silent news footage of police lights, reflecting off rain-covered streets. Lena watched only briefly while replacing supplies inside a crash cart. 3 police vehicles visible in frame 1 positioned incorrectly. Not random containment. She looked away. At the nurse's station, charge nurse Miriam Holt rubbed her eyes tiredly. You should take a break, she told Lena. I'm fine. That was not a suggestion. Lena finally nodded. Once, she picked up a paper cup of coffee from the staff counter and moved toward the quieter administrative hallway near the ambulance entrance. The farther end of the corridor remained mostly dark at night. Storage rooms, maintenance, access security office. As she walked, her pace slowed slightly. A maintenance door near the loading corridor was open 3 inches. It should have been locked. Lena stopped, listened. Nothing, only distant thunder outside. Then she noticed something else. The camera above the rear corridor entrance had stopped moving, still operational, but fixed in one position. Someone had manually disabled its rotation. A security guard appeared behind her carrying paperwork. You okay? Lena looked away from the camera. When was the last system check? The guard shrugged. Tonight's been chaos. Why? She studied the silent hallway another second, then shook her head lightly. Probably nothing. The guard laughed tiredly. In this place, nothing would be a miracle. He continued walking, but Lena stayed where she was, watching the motionless camera, watching the partially open maintenance door. Somewhere outside the hospital, sirens echoed through the rain, and for the first time that night, the quiet trauma nurse looked uneasy. At 1:52 a.m., the automatic ambulance doors opened hard enough to strike the wall behind them. Cold rain swept briefly into the emergency wing. 2 paramedics rushed inside, pushing a heavily built man strapped to a stretcher. Blood soaked through multiple layers of gauze across his shoulder and lower abdomen. A police jacket had been cut open down the center of his chest. Officer down, one paramedic shouted. The emergency room moved instantly. Doctors stepped aside from other patients. A trauma bed cleared. Monitors rolled forward. Lena reached the stretcher first. The wounded officer's eyes were open but unfocused. His breathing came shallow and uneven beneath. The oxygen mask gunshot wounds, at least 2, maybe 3. But something about the scene felt wrong immediately. Not the injuries, the behavior around them. The paramedics looked frightened, not stressed, frightened. One kept glancing toward the ambulance entrance every few seconds as if expecting someone to follow them inside. Where did this happen? Lena asked while cutting away the remaining fabric near the wound. Warehouse district, the paramedic answered quickly. Active scene? No idea. Too fast. Too rehearsed. The officer grabbed weakly at Lena's wrist before she could continue. His fingers trembled from blood loss. They're here. Lena leaned closer. Who? But the man's eyes drifted again. A trauma surgeon entered beside her. What do we have? Penetrating abdominal trauma, Lena said. Possible internal bleed. Blood pressure unstable. The surgeon nodded and immediately began issuing orders. Around them, the emergency wing accelerated into controlled chaos. Again, another nurse started. Transfusion prep, the respiratory therapist. adjusted oxygen flow security, moved civilians farther back from the trauma area, but Lena kept watching the paramedic near the ambulance. Doors! The man's hands shook while signing paperwork. His eyes never stopped. Moving, scanning exits, windows, hallways, not normal. At the far side of the ER, televisions continued showing muted footage from downtown, police barricades, rain blue, lights reflecting off flooded streets, a scrolling headline appeared beneath the footage. Multiple armed suspects. Still at large. The charge nurse looked up from the television. Jesus, nobody responded. The officer on the table suddenly arched, upward in pain. Fresh blood spread beneath him. The surgeon cursed softly. We're losing him. Lena moved without hesitation, pressures dropping because the packing shifted. How do you know? His left side tightened. First, the surgeon looked once, then immediately, nodded. Reset it. Lena pressed both gloved hands firmly against the wound, while another nurse stabilized the officer's shoulders. The man screamed once through clenched teeth before collapsing back against the bed. Monitor tone steadied slightly. Not safe, but better. The surgeon exhaled slowly. Good. Catch! Lena said nothing. The officer's hand found her wrist again. This time his grip tightened with surprising strength. His eyes focused directly on hers for the first time. They're not robbers, he whispered. Then he lost consciousness completely. The surgical team rushed him toward the operating elevators upstairs as the stretcher disappeared around the corner. Lena remained still beside the blood-streaked trauma bed. Not robbers. The words stayed with her. Near the nurse's station, security radios crackled louder than before. Possible accomplices, officers requesting perimeter support. The tactical units delayed. Every message sounded fragmented, unorganized. Whatever was happening outside was growing worse. Miriam approached Lena holding a clipboard against her chest. You all right? Yes. You look distracted. Lena removed her gloves carefully. The paramedics. What about them? They were scared before they came inside. Miriam glanced toward the ambulance entrance. Everybody's scared tonight. No, Lena said quietly. Not like that. Before Miriam could answer, another commotion erupted near the waiting area. A man in wet civilian clothes was shouting at hospital security. I need to see my brother! Sir, calm down. He's a cop! The argument escalated quickly enough that several patients turned to watch. Lena observed from across the room. The civilian's anger looked genuine, but his eyes moved too much, tracking positions. Counting personnel. Security noticed only the shouting. Lena noticed everything else. The man finally slammed both hands against the reception counter. I just want to know if he's alive. One security guard stepped closer, and for half a second, the civilian's posture changed, balanced, ready. Then, it vanished again beneath panic. Lena moved before she consciously decided to. Let him through, she said calmly. Everyone looked toward her. The security guard frowned. You know him? No. Then why? Because if you keep blocking him here, you'll turn the waiting room into a problem. The man looked directly at Lena now, measuring her, noticing her calmness. She returned the stare evenly. No challenge, no fear, just observation. After a tense moment, the civilian stepped back from the counter. Fine, he muttered. Security escorted him toward a side hallway to verify his identity, but Lena kept watching until he disappeared completely from view. Miriam lowered her voice beside her. What was that? Lena answered without looking away. He never once asked his brother's name. Silence. The charge nurse stared at her. You think he's connected? I think he was looking at exits more than people. Before Miriam could respond, the lights flickered once overhead, only for a second, but long enough for several monitors to reset briefly. Staff members groaned in frustration. Backup systems restored immediately. Still, Lena's expression hardened slightly. Power fluctuations, disabled camera, nervous paramedics, unknown suspects. Nothing alone meant much. Together, they formed a pattern, Across the emergency wing, rain hammered harder against the windows. Then, another sound echoed faintly through the hallway outside, not thunder metal. Heavy door closing somewhere deeper inside the hospital. Lena looked toward the darkened ambulance corridor again. This time, she noticed the security camera above it had gone completely black. At 2:17 a.m., the emergency wing lost contact with hospital security. Nobody noticed immediately. The phones still worked, monitors still beeped, patients still filled the hallways beneath fluorescent lights. For almost 30 seconds, St. Gabriel Medical Center continued operating normally, while the people responsible for protecting it disappeared from the system entirely. Then the first lockdown door slammed shut. The metallic impact echoed through the emergency corridor, hard enough to silence nearby conversations. Heads turned instantly. A nurse near radiology looked up in confusion. That wasn't scheduled. Another door closed, then another. Heavy reinforced barriers designed for hazardous contamination incidents dropped section by section across the emergency wing. Panic began spreading before anyone understood why. What's happening? Why are the doors closing? Call security. Miriam grabbed the nearest desk phone. Deadline. No signal. The overhead paging system crackled with static before cutting out completely. Patients started rising from chairs in the waiting area. Somebody screamed near pediatrics when a security shutter sealed the hallway without warning. The entire emergency department suddenly felt smaller, trapped. Lena stood near Trauma Bay 2 watching the corridor intersections carefully, not panicking, counting. One lockdown barrier near the ambulance corridor, another near radiology, a third isolating the south treatment wing. Controlled segmentation. Intentional. Not random system failure. Then came the gunshots. 3 sharp cracks echoed somewhere beyond the ambulance entrance. Not close yet, but inside the hospital. The emergency room froze. For one terrible second, nobody moved at all. Then chaos exploded. People dropped behind chairs. Patients began crying. A doctor shouted for everyone to stay down, while security guards rushed toward the corridor with sidearms half drawn. Another burst of gunfire answered them immediately. One guard stumbled backward into the wall, clutching his shoulder. Blood sprayed across the tile floor. The second guard dragged him behind the nurse's station as civilians screamed nearby. "Get everyone down! Move away from the entrances! Lock the trauma doors!" But the automatic trauma doors were already cycling open. Someone had overridden them remotely. Lena moved fast for the first time all night. Not dramatic, precise. She grabbed a rolling medication cart and shoved it sideways into the pediatric hallway entrance before helping a terrified mother pull 2 children behind the reception counter. "Stay low," she told her. The woman's hands shook violently. What is happening? Lena listened to the distant footsteps echoing through the corridor. Disciplined movement. Fast, controlled spacing. Not random shooters. "They're coming this way," she said quietly. Miriam stared at her. "How do you know that?" Lena didn't answer. Another gunshot thundered through the hallway. Closer now. One of the junior nurses started hyperventilating beside the supply room entrance. "I can't do this," he whispered. "I can't." Lena crouched beside him. Listen carefully. The young nurse looked at her with wide, terrified eyes. "You are going to help move patients away from the corridor intersections. I don't know how you do." Her voice never rose, never rushed. "Take anyone who can walk, use the oxygen storage hallway, stay below window level." Something in her tone cut through his panic. The nurse swallowed hard, then nodded. Lena stood again and scanned the emergency wing. Too exposed, too many civilians, too few exits. The security barriers had trapped nearly 60 people inside the emergency department, and whoever entered the hospital understood exactly how the building functioned. A wounded security guard grabbed Lena's arm as she passed. "There are 4 of them," he breathed painfully. "Masks. Rifles." "Where?" "Ambulance corridor." The man winced hard. They knew the security routes. Lena looked down at the blood soaking through his uniform. professional grouping pattern. Controlled bursts, fast suppression, military-style entry. Her jaw tightened slightly. Across the room, doctors were attempting to barricade the main reception area with overturned chairs and supply carts. Nobody had a plan. Fear was beginning to fracture the room into isolated groups. That was when the lights failed. Complete darkness swallowed the emergency wing. Gasps erupted immediately. A child screamed. Somewhere deeper in the corridor, Boots moved carefully through the dark. Then the backup generators activated. Dim red emergency lighting flooded the department. Everything looked different now. Long shadows, blood across reflective tile, smoke drifting faintly from somewhere near the ambulance entrance, and standing briefly at the far end of the corridor, a masked man carrying a rifle, only visible for a second before disappearing behind the wall again. But Lena saw enough. Body armor, compact weapon setup, disciplined posture, not street criminals, not desperate men, trained operators. The wounded security guard whispered beside her, "Please tell me police are coming." Lena looked toward the dark corridor. "No," she said softly. The man stared at her, because it was not hopelessness in her voice. It was calculation. Near the center of the emergency wing, another loud metallic crash echoed through the building. More barriers locking down. More sections isolated. The attackers were controlling movement now. One of the doctors approached Lena quickly. "You worked emergency response before, right? Why? What do we do?" She looked around the room. Terrified civilians, exhausted staff, narrow corridors, limited cover. The gunmen had not entered the main trauma area yet, which meant they were searching, not killing randomly. Important difference. "Move everyone who can walk into interior rooms," Lena said calmly. "What?" "Keep lights low. No loud conversations. Stay away from corridor intersections." The doctor hesitated. "Who put you in charge?" Lena met his eyes evenly. "No one." Then another burst of automatic gunfire erupted somewhere near radiology, closer than before. "Much closer," a voice shouted faintly through the corridor. Not panicked, commanding. The attackers were coordinating positions. Lena turned toward the sound instinctively, listening, mapping movement in her head. And for the first time since the lockdown began, she looked not afraid, but focused. Because she finally understood what kind of men had entered the hospital and what they were capable of doing next. The emergency wing did not feel like a hospital anymore. It felt like a contained space being slowly measured, every hallway, every corner, every blind spot. Lena could hear it in the movement now, not random. Footsteps, spacing discipline, 2 to 3 meters between operators, cover angles maintained. Even while advancing, no wasted sound. The gunfire had stopped briefly, not because the threat was gone, but because the shooters were repositioning. That was worse. Silence meant control. Miriam pulled Lena into a dim corner near the supply alcove. "Talk to me," she whispered urgently. "What is happening out there?" Lena didn't look at her immediately. She was watching the corridor reflection in the metal cabinet door. "One team," she said quietly. "Minimum 3. Possibly 4. How do you know that?" "Because they stopped firing to coordinate." Miriam's breathing tightened. "That doesn't make sense." "They're criminals." Lena finally looked at her. "Criminals. Don't clear rooms like this." A distant voice echoed through the hallway. Sharp, controlled. Command phrase in an unfamiliar language. Not English, not local. The sound of someone responding immediately followed. They were communicating across sections. The hospital's emergency wing had become segmented. Terrain. And they were moving through it like an operation grid across the corridor. A security guard pulled a terrified nurse behind a reinforced counter. "We need backup." "There is no backup," someone shouted back. A crash echoed near radiology as a door was breached. Then a scream, short, cut off too quickly. The sound of a body hitting tile followed. The entire room went silent again. Lena closed her eyes for half a second. Not fear, processing. Then she moved. "Get everyone from this corridor into Trauma Bay 4, she said. Miriam grabbed her arm. "Why that one?" Because it has no direct line of sight from the ambulance entrance. That's not enough. It's the least exposed point left. Miriam stared at her. Something about the certainty in Lena's voice made argument feel pointless. Still, she whispered, "You're speaking like you've done this before." Lena didn't answer. She simply moved past her toward the trauma corridor. Behind them, another door exploded open. Heavy boots entered the emergency wing. This time, they were visible. 3 men. Black tactical gear. No visible insignia. Masks covering their faces. Weapons held tight against their chests in ready position. Not firing randomly, but scanning systematically. The first man stopped at the intersection, raised a hand slightly. The team froze. Perfect synchronization. Then, he pointed down the left corridor. 2 men moved. 1 stayed behind, covering, flanking, clean. Geometry of movement, Miriam. Saw them and stumbled backward. Oh my God! The man at the rear tilted his head slightly as if listening, then raised his weapon, but not randomly, targeting. The emergency camera dome 1. Shot! The camera shattered instantly. Lena watched from behind a partially open door. No hesitation. No wasted rounds. Professionals. Not just trained. Refined. The gunmen advanced deeper into the hospital, not rushing, not searching. Blindly, they were narrowing, which meant they had a target. A specific patient, or a specific file. Something inside this hospital mattered enough to deploy a team like this. Lena moved quietly through the connecting corridor, staying below window level, avoiding reflective surfaces. Her steps never rushed, each placement intentional. She reached a junction point near the pharmacy corridor and paused, listening. 2 voices ahead. Low frequency communication, 1 hand signal, another. Response, they were splitting the wing. 1 team moving toward trauma, 1 toward records. She exhaled slowly, then noticed something else. The injured security guard she had treated earlier was gone from the area where he had been hiding. Blood trail remained, but no body taken or moved. That was new. The attackers were not just controlling space. They were controlling information. Loud metallic snap echoed behind her. Lena turned, instantly. Too late. A gunman stepped into the corridor behind her, close. Less than 10 meters. He had seen her, for a fraction of a second. Neither moved. Then the gunman lifted his weapon, but did not fire immediately. He paused, studying her. Something about her position didn't match civilian behavior. Lena stood still. Not hiding, not retreating, just observing him back. The silence stretched. Then the gunman tilted his head slightly and spoke into a headset short phrase. Lena couldn't hear the response, but she saw his posture change immediately. Recognition, not confusion. Recognition. He took 1 step forward, weapon still raised. Clear corridor, he said calmly into his mic. 2 more operators began moving behind him. They were converging on her position and, for the first time since the lockdown began, the hospital was no longer the only thing being evaluated, so was she. Lena did not retreat. Retreat would have confirmed intent. Instead, she shifted her weight slightly and stepped into the edge of the corridor light, where red emergency illumination broke across the tile floor in fractured lines. The gunman ahead of her held position. Weapon still raised, but no shot followed. Behind him, 2 more operators moved into partial cover positions, clearing angles without speaking. They were not rushing her. They were reading her. Lena's eyes moved once, brief, precise, across their formation. Spacing. Cover discipline. Weapon indexing. Professional stack integrity. Not a breach team improvising under panic. A unit executing a controlled interior sweep. The gunman in front spoke again into his mic. Short, flat, a confirmation, not a question. Then he took 1 step forward. Lena spoke first. Not loud, not challenging. Hospital civilians are inside Trauma Bay 4 and Pediatrics Holding Corridor, she said. The gunman paused. A fraction. Not because of fear, because of context mismatch, she continued. No armed resistance in this corridor. You already cleared it. Silence followed. One of the operators behind him shifted slightly, adjusting angle toward her left flank, covering her escape route, or containment. Lena did not move her gaze. The gunman tilted his head. "Move," he said. "Not aggressive. Command-level instruction." Lena nodded once, then walked, past him, slowly. No sudden movements. Her path took her directly between two operators. They allowed it. That alone told her everything. They were not improvising anymore. They had identified zones of importance, and she had just been classified as non-threat or controlled asset. That classification was dangerous, because it meant she was now part of their map. Behind her, one operator spoke softly into his comms. Lena caught a fragment. Possible internal staff with tactical awareness. That was enough. She continued forward into the junction corridor leading toward Trauma Bay 4. The deeper she went, the more controlled the hospital felt. Not chaotic anymore. Partitioned, like someone had drawn invisible boundaries and was now enforcing them step by step. She reached the intersection near pharmacy storage and stopped. Inside Trauma Bay 4, faint movement, staff gathering patients. Whispers, controlled panic. Miriam was there, directing people into positions behind overturned supply carts. When she saw Lena, her expression tightened. "You came back from that side?" she whispered. Lena nodded slightly. "They are organizing," she said. Miriam blinked. Organizing what? Control of movement, not random searching. Miriam shook her head. "That doesn't matter. We need police." "Police are outside containment lines," Lena interrupted quietly. That silence hit harder than shouting. From the hallway behind them, a distant metallic click echoed. Someone cycling a weapon, not firing. Preparing. Lena turned slightly toward the sound. "They are closing distance," she said. Miriam's voice dropped. "What do we do?" Lena looked around Trauma Bay 4. No reinforced doors on one side. Limited cover, one secondary exit leading toward maintenance corridors. Then she made a decision. "Move all patients into the imaging corridor," she said. "That area is exposed. It has blind angles and structural cover from the west wing." Miriam hesitated. "You're sure?" Lena didn't answer immediately. She was already scanning ceiling corners, wall reinforcement points, and line-of-sight weaknesses. "Yes," she said finally. Miriam swallowed hard, then turned. "Move them." The biome staff obeyed, not because they understood, but because hesitation felt more dangerous than action. Lena stayed behind for a moment, listening. Footsteps now closer, measured, two directions converging. The operators were compressing space, not spreading fear randomly anymore. They were tightening containment. She stepped into the corridor again and pressed her hand briefly against the cold metal frame of the wall. Mapping. Then she heard it. A radio burst from somewhere deeper in the wing. Not hospital frequency, not civilian emergency channel. Short, military cadence. Then a response. Lena's eyes narrowed slightly. So they were communicating externally. This was not isolated. It was coordinated beyond the hospital walls. She exhaled slowly, then turned and nearly collided with movement behind her. One operator stood at the end of the corridor. Closer now. Weapon lowered slightly. Not relaxed. Assessed. Behind him, another shape appeared in the darkness. And then another. They had adjusted their formation. She was no longer just observed. She was being bracketed. The first operator spoke, calm, controlled. "Step into the bay." Lena did not move immediately. Inside Trauma Bay 4, someone called her name once, uncertain, scared. Miriam. Waiting for instruction. The hospital was still holding together only because people were following her decisions, and now she stood between two realities, civilian lives behind her, unknown tactical operators in front. She finally stepped forward. Not because she surrendered, but because she had already started calculating what came next. Trauma Bay 4 felt smaller than it should have, not physically, emotionally. Every surface was occupied, patients on stretchers, frightened families pressed against walls, staff trying to keep voices low while their hands betrayed them with small, uncontrolled movements. Lena entered first, behind her. The operators followed at a controlled distance, not rushing, not searching, positioning. That detail changed the entire atmosphere instantly. People noticed it even if they didn't understand it. The way they moved did not match random violence. It matched containment. Miriam stepped closer to Lena. Immediately, they're inside now, she whispered. I know, Lena replied, her eyes scanned the room once. Then again, there were too many. Civilians clustered near the central wall, too. Exposed, she turned slightly, moved patients away from the glass partition, she said. A doctor shook his head. We don't even know what they want yet. That doesn't matter, Lena interrupted quietly. The doctor stopped, not because she raised her voice, because she didn't. From the corridor outside, a distant metallic impact echoed, another lockdown door shifting position. The hospital was still being reshaped, step by step. Miriam grabbed Lena's sleeve. You keep acting like you understand them. Lena didn't answer immediately, because she did, and that was the problem. A patient near the far corner suddenly cried out in pain, post-trauma agitation, oxygen deprivation, fear overload. A nurse rushed to stabilize him. The sound triggered movement in the corridor. Immediate response outside. 1. Operator adjusted position. Another lifted his weapon slightly, not aiming, yet waiting. Lena noticed the reaction instantly. Their sensitivity threshold was extremely low. Noise, movement, threat evaluation. She stepped closer to Miriam. Do not let anyone run, she said quietly. What? Running triggers response, Miriam stared at her. That's not how criminals think. Lena's eyes stayed fixed on the corridor entrance. They are not thinking like criminals. Before Miriam could respond, the operators entered the bay. Fully, 3 visible now, spacing intact. Angles maintained. The lead operator scanned the room once, then spoke into his calm, short data confirmation phrase. Again, then silence. One of the operators stepped slightly forward, adjusting his weapon toward the far side of the room, not at people, but at exit routes. Containment. Geometry. Lena stood still. The lead operator finally looked directly at her. Longer this time. Not confusion. Anymore. Assessment then. He spoke. Medical staff will remain where assigned. A pause. Then, non-compliance will be treated as interference. The room tightened. A nurse near the wall began shaking uncontrollably. A doctor whispered, "Oh God." Lena stepped half a pace forward. Not aggressive, not submissive. Controlled presence. What is your objective here? She asked. The operator did not answer immediately. He looked at her like someone reviewing a file that didn't match expectations. Then he spoke into his mic. Again, short exchange. Then he answered her. Directly, extraction, only one word, but it shifted the entire room. Miriam looked at Lena. Extraction of what? Lena did not respond because she already understood the implication. This was not a random hospital. Breach, not robbery, not terrorism without structure. This was retrieval, targeted retrieval inside a controlled medical facility, and that meant there was a specific person somewhere in this wing. Though, operator stepped closer by one controlled pace. Where is the patient from Unit Transport 7? Silence. Doctors looked at each other in confusion. No one recognized the designation, but Lena did. Her expression did not change, yet something inside the room shifted subtly around her presence. The operator noticed. He stopped. Repeat, he said quietly. Lena spoke. First, that designation is not in civilian records. A pause. The operator's posture tightened slightly. Lena continued. It belongs to Federal Transit. Classification. Murmurs erupted behind her. Miriam stared at her. What are you saying? Lena didn't look away from the operator. I'm saying this is not a hospital incident anymore. The operator's weapon angled slightly, not at her, but closer to readiness. "You are not on authorized list," he said. That sentence landed heavier than gunfire because it confirmed recognition. Failure. Lena nodded once. Correct. Long silence followed. Then the operator raised his hand. Slightly, not to fire, to signal. Behind him, two operators shifted positions instantly, angles tightening, closing space. The room realized too late that the conversation had already changed shape. Not negotiation. Verification. Miriam whispered, "Lena, what did you just say to them?" Lena finally looked at her briefly. Nothing. That wasn't true. The operator spoke again. "Stand. Down from movement coordination." That was not a suggestion, it was classification enforcement. And for the first time, Lena's expression changed slightly. Not fear, recognition of constraint. Because they had just identified her as someone who understood structure, which meant she could be controlled through structure. Miriam's voice broke slightly. "What do they want from you?" Lena did not answer, because outside the room, another sound echoed through the corridor. Multiple boots, reinforced entry team, approaching, but different rhythm. Not the same unit. This was external response, and it was coming fast. The operators inside the room shifted again. The lead one turned his head slightly toward the corridor, then spoke into comms, short, urgent. Then, silence. He looked back at Lena. For the first time, tension appeared, not panic, adjustment. Because something unexpected was arriving. Lena noticed it immediately. "They didn't plan for external breach yet," she said softly. The operator didn't respond, but his stance changed, slightly tighter, more defensive. The situation was no longer fully under their control. And in that moment, for the first time since the hospital was locked down, Lena was no longer the only one being evaluated. The first external breach hit the hospital like a controlled impact. Not explosive, not chaotic. Precise. A reinforced side door near the ambulance corridor was forced open with shaped hydraulic pressure, not gunfire. Metal groaned, then gave way in a slow, deliberate collapse that echoed through the emergency wing like something breaking its last boundary. Then boots entered. Different rhythm, heavier. Spacing. Coordinated teams moving in standard tactical. Flow federal response units, but even they moved cautiously, because the internal situation was already classified as unknown threat control. Inside Trauma Bay 4, everyone heard it, the shift in sound. The difference between containment and intervention. Miriam looked toward Lena. "They're here," she whispered. Lena didn't answer immediately. Her
eyes were still on the operators inside the A
room. They had changed posture again, no longer purely focused, inward. Now divided attention. Two threats, internal, civilians, external breach. The lead operator spoke. Into his mic quickly, short bursts, then silence. Turned slightly toward his team. One hand, signal, immediate response. Two operators repositioned. Toward the corridor entrance, not retreating, rebalancing. Lena observed it without blinking. "They are not surprised," she said quietly. Miriam frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means they expected resistance," Lena replied. From the corridor outside, a loud metallic impact echoed, followed by shouting. Not panic shouting, command shouting. "Clear left." "Moving in." "Contact unknown inside wing." The hospital was no longer a single environment. It had become layered conflict space, two forces, entering from opposite control assumptions, and civilians trapped between. That's why lighting flickered again, this time longer. Backup. Generators struggling under load redistribution. For a moment, the entire emergency wing dipped into near darkness. Red emergency lights returned slowly. When they did, shadows had shifted, positions were harder to read, visibility reduced, tension increased. A nurse near the far wall cried softly, trying to stay quiet but failing. A gunman's attention snapped toward the sound immediately. One step forward. Weapon raising. Lena moved instantly, not toward the gunman, toward the nurse. She placed herself between them without hesitation. "Stay still," she told the nurse quietly. The gunman paused. Not because of the action, because of the timing. She had moved with awareness of trigger response thresholds. That mattered. Outside the room, federal voices echoed closer now. "Hospital secure zones compromised. Unknown hostile presence in Trauma 4. Do not engage civilians." The operators inside the room adjusted again, now fully braced, between two pressure points. External breach, tightening, internal containment unstable. The lead operator spoke again into comms, short, urgent. Then, looked at Lena directly. Something had changed in his evaluation, not recognition of threat. Recognition of competence. He stepped slightly closer. Not enough to threaten civilians. Enough to speak clearly. "You are not civilian medical staff," he said. Miriam turned toward Lena instantly. "What?" Lena didn't answer her. Her focus remained on the operator. The statement was not accusation. It was correction of classification, the operator continued. "Your movement pattern is trained." Silence spread through the room. Even the crying stopped. Lena finally spoke. "People are injured," she said. "That remains unchanged." The operator held her gaze. Outside, gunfire erupted in the corridor. Short burst, return fire followed. DTO. Hospital shook with layered sound now. Two conflicts. Intersecting. The operator spoke. Again. Federal extraction protocol includes personnel retrieval. Pause. Then, "You are not on civilian protection list." Miriam stepped forward. "Lena." "What are they talking about?" Lena finally looked at her briefly, but did not answer, because at that exact moment, a new voice came through the corridor. Clear, controlled, Federal Tactical Command. "Stand down, internal sweep. Confirm presence of Special Operations medical asset." The entire room changed temperature emotionally. Miriam froze. The operator inside the room paused. Completely. Even the gunfire outside seemed to momentarily feel distant. Lena closed her eyes. For a fraction of a second, not relief, containment. Then, she opened them again. And in that moment, every person in Trauma Bay 4 understood something without being told. She had not been discovered. She had been identified. The corridor outside Trauma Bay 4 went quiet in a way that felt wrong, not safe controlled like sound had been deliberately. Pulled out of the space, then footsteps approached, measured, not rushing, not clearing. Aggressively confirming, a federal tactical team entered the emergency wing. Intersection first, moving in tight formation with weapons raised but not aimed at civilians. Their presence changed the entire geometry of the hospital. Instantly, because now there were no longer just intruders inside. There were responders, with authority to override them. Inside Trauma Bay 4, the operators holding the room adjusted again. Subtle shift. Shoulders tightening, angles narrowing. The lead operator spoke once into his comms short, unstable now, then silence. The federal team leader stepped into view at the corridor entrance, helmet off, eyes scanning immediately. Took in the room in one sweep. Civilians.medical. Staff, armed operators, then Lena. His expression changed instantly. Not confusion, recognition. A pause that did not belong. In an active breach environment. Then, he lowered his weapon slightly. Not fully, just enough to signal a break in threat classification. "Hold. Positions," he said into his mic. Behind him, his team froze. He stepped forward slowly into the room. The air felt tighter with every step. Miriam instinctively moved closer to Lena without realizing it. "What is happening?" she whispered. Lena did not respond. The federal leader stopped a few meters inside the room. His eyes stayed fixed on Lena, not on the armed operators, not on the civilians, only her. Then he spoke. Carefully, formally. "Ma'am," he said. A pause. The room absorbed that word, differently than anything before, because it was not medical staff, not suspect, not civilian. It was rank-level address. The operator opposite Lena shifted, slightly uncertainty entering his stance. For the first time, the federal leader continued. We were not briefed you were inside this facility. Silence. Miriam stared at Lena now, completely lost. Lena's voice remained calm. I am assigned here. The federal leader shook his head slightly. No, he said quietly. You were reassigned off-grid. That sentence changed. Everything in the room, even the armed operators, stopped moving. Because off-grid did not mean civilian. It meant removed from standard operational visibility. The federal leader took one more step. Forward, his voice lowered. You are Ranger Medical Section. Classified attachment, he said. A pause. Then more carefully. Confirmed Special Operations Trauma Response Asset. The words did not land like praise. They landed like confirmation of reality. Miriam stepped back slightly. No, she whispered. Lena, what is he saying? Lena did not look at her. The operator opposite her slowly lowered his weapon a fraction. Not surrender, reassessment. The chi. Federal leader finally turned slightly, toward the armed operators. His tone changed. Controlled authority. Returning. Stand down, internal containment. Posture, he ordered. The operators did not immediately comply because their chain of command was still active, still unresolved. The lead operator spoke into his comms again. Short. Then looked at Lena one more time. Something, like understanding, forming. Then he stepped back. One step. Then, another weapon lowering gradually, not defeated. Reclassifying threat environment. The federal leader watched this carefully, then spoke again into his mic. Internal threat is now controlled. Transition to recovery protocol. Outside the room, distant gunfire began fading, not disappearing, receding. The battle outside was being absorbed by coordinated response. Inside Trauma Bay 4, the civilians slowly began to realize they were no longer in immediate danger, but Lena did not move. Not yet. The federal leader approached her directly now, close enough that his voice was only for her. We were told you were not operational, he said quietly. Lena finally met his eyes. I was not deployed. A pause. The federal leader nodded. Once. I understand why they did not want you visible, he replied. Miriam looked between them, shaken. You were military? She asked softly. Lena did not answer. Because the answer had already been given for her. The federal leader stepped slightly aside and gestured toward the corridor. We need you to confirm internal sweep mapping, he said. Lena looked at the exit, then back at the room. Patient still. Terrified. Staff exhausted. Lives still fragile. She shook her head, slightly. No. The federal leader paused. That was unexpected. What do you need? He asked instead. Lena finally spoke. Stabilize the wing first. Silence. Then he nodded once. Understood. He turned to his team. Prioritize civilian corridor stabilization. No further engagement inside medical bays. The order moved instantly through comms. Outside, sound continued to fade. Not peace. Control reasserted. Miriam stepped closer again, voice breaking slightly. Lena! Are you leaving? Lena looked at her for the first time fully since the breach began. No, she said, a pause. I am staying until patients are stable. That was all. No explanation, no identity revealed. Further, just function. The federal leader watched her for a moment longer, then spoke quietly. You always do, he said, and for the first time since the hospital went dark, someone inside the room understood that this was not the first time she had been the one holding chaos together. The emergency wing no longer sounded like a battlefield. It sounded like exhaustion, broken voices, soft instructions, equipment being reset, doors unlocking one by one as containment protocols were lifted and replaced with recovery procedures. But Trauma Bay 4 stayed crowded with silence, not the empty kind, the heavy kind that follows survival. Lena moved between patients without ceremony, checking vitals, adjusting oxygen flow, replacing IV lines. No one followed her now out of confusion. They followed because everything stabilized when she moved. Miriam stayed close, but quieter than before, watching instead of questioning. At the far end of the bay, a child lay on a transport bed, small frame, burn injuries, from glass impact during the initial lockdown. Panicked on oxygen mask slightly too large for his face, his mother sat, beside him holding his hand, with both of hers like she was afraid to let go even for a second. The federal team had already cleared the corridor outside. The armed operators were gone, transferred into custody protocol. What remained was medical, aftermath, and silence. The federal leader approached. Lena once more carefully this time. Debrief team is requesting your statement, he said. Lena didn't look up from the monitor. She was adjusting later. He hesitated, then nodded, understood. He stepped back, respecting the boundary without argument. That alone made Miriam realize something deeper. No one here was managing Lena anymore. They were adapting around her. A nurse nearby whispered to another, she wasn't just helping, she was directing everything. The second nurse shook her head slightly. I thought she was just quiet. Lena heard it. She did not react. At 03:41 a.m., the child's condition began to deteriorate, subtle at first. Oxygen saturation, dropping, heart rate irregular. The attending physician moved. Quickly, we need pediatric transfer, now. But elevators were still partially locked due to system reset, delays, complications, everything. Still unstable. The mother panicked immediately. No, please don't. Move him away from me. Miriam stepped forward to assist the doctor. But Lena stopped her with a simple gesture. Not forceful. Final, Lena moved to the child's bedside. She checked the monitor once, then again. Her eyes narrowed slightly, airway shifting due to swelling. She said. The doctor looked up. Yes, but we're compensating. Not enough. Silence. The room watched her. She adjusted the oxygen angle slightly, then repositioned the child's head with precise care. Not rushed, not emotional, correct. The saturation stabilized, slightly, but not fully. The mother's hands trembled. Harder. Is he going to die? No one answered immediately, because no one wanted to be wrong. Lena stayed beside the child, watching, measuring, thinking. Then she spoke quietly. He is not stable yet. Pause. But he is not lost. The mother broke down quietly beside the bed. Miriam looked away for a moment. Overwhelmed. The doctor stepped back slightly. How do you know that? He asked. Lena didn't answer. She simply adjusted one final setting on the monitor interface and signaled for medication dosage correction. Her hands were steady. Too steady for someone who had been awake through violence and lockdown. Minutes passed, slow, measured. Tokyo. Child's oxygen level climbed again. Not fully normal, but stable. Enough. The doctor exhaled, relief. The mother leaned forward, still crying. But now differently, not panic. Release. Lena stepped back from the bed. That was the moment the federal leader returned, quietly to the doorway. He watched the scene for a second, then spoke. Softly. They always respond to you like that. He said. Lena finally looked up. Like what? Like they don't know how you're doing it, he replied. A pause. Then, but they trust that you are. Silence followed. The hospital was finally calming. Outside the windows, the rain had slowed. The city lights returned in faint reflections across wet glass. The crisis was ending, but not everything resolved neatly. A nurse approached Lena, hesitantly. There are journalists outside, she said. Security is holding them. Lena gave a small nod. I will not speak to them. The nurse looked relieved. Miriam stepped closer again, quieter now. What happens after this? Lena looked toward the hallway where stretchers were being moved back into standard positions. Patients recover, she said. A pause, and reports are written. Miriam studied her. And you? Lena didn't answer immediately, then I go back to work, as if nothing had changed, as if the night had not rewritten everything. The federal leader overheard that and looked at her more carefully. You're still assigned here? He asked. Lena nodded once. Yes, he seemed to consider that for a moment, then simply said, understood. No argument, no request, just acceptance. At 04:12 a.m., the child in Trauma Bay 4 finally slept under stable vitals. His mother remained beside him. The hospital was quiet again, not peaceful, just recovering. Lena stood at the edge of the bay for a moment longer, looking across the room she had held together without anyone noticing until it collapsed. Then she turned slightly toward the exit corridor. No one stopped her. No one called her back. Because for once, everyone understood she was not leaving. She was simply no longer needed in the same way. The hospital did not fully return to normal. It returned to function. Those were not the same thing. By 04:38 a.m., emergency shutters were lifted section by section, revealing corridors that looked unchanged, yet felt structurally different in memory. Every staff member who had been present understood that something permanent had shifted inside St. Gabriel Medical Center, but the building continued working anyway, because hospitals always do. Lena stood alone near the staff exit corridor. Her gloves were gone. Her scrubs were stained at the cuffs but already partially cleaned by routine hand washing she had completed without thinking. Around her, cleanup teams moved quietly. Security re-established perimeter points. Federal personnel collected statements and controlled interviews. No chaos remained, only aftermath. Miriam approached slowly from behind. She stopped a few steps away, as if unsure whether distance was required now. "You're leaving?" she asked. Lena shook her head slightly. "End of shift." Miriam gave a faint, almost disbelieving laugh. "After tonight, you still call it that?" Lena didn't respond, because for her, it was still true. A shift had started. A shift had ended. Everything else was consequence. Behind them, a federal officer walked past carrying a sealed case file. He paused briefly when he saw Lena, not to speak loudly, just enough to acknowledge. "Ma'am," he said quietly, then continued walking. No crowd gathered, no attention followed. But Miriam noticed. She looked at Lena again. "You know they won't leave this alone," she said. Lena understood what she meant. Investigations, reports, reclassifications, questions that would never fully be answered in public records. She nodded once. "I know." A pause. Miriam lowered her voice. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Lena finally turned slightly toward her. Not cold, not distant, just direct. Because it was not necessary. That answer hurt more than silence. From the corridor behind them, the first natural light of early morning began to appear through high windows. Gray-blue, soft. The kind of light that makes everything look less violent than it was. The hospital looked almost normal again under it. Almost. A stretcher rolled past with a recovering patient speaking softly to a nurse. Life continuing. Not forgetting. Just continuing. The federal leader appeared once more near the exit, this time without urgency. Only formality. He stopped in front of Lena. "We've secured full clearance of the wing," he said. Lena nodded. "Good." A pause, then he added, "Internal report will remain classified." She didn't react. That was expected. He hesitated briefly, then spoke more quietly. "They asked if you want recognition filed." Miriam looked up sharply. Lena answered immediately. "No." The federal leader studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Understood." He stepped back slightly, then, almost as an afterthought, "You saved more people than we can count tonight." Lena didn't respond. Not because she disagreed, because she had already moved past counting. The leader gave a final nod and turned away. Miriam stood there for a long moment after he left, then finally spoke. "You're going to disappear again, aren't you?" Lena looked toward the exit door. Morning was brighter now. The city outside was waking up. "I am not disappearing," she said. A pause. I am going home. Miriam swallowed. You could be anything after this. Lena turned slightly, looked at her properly. I already am. Not arrogance, not pride, just fact. She stepped toward the exit corridor, paused once, not for recognition, not for farewell, just a final check of the building behind her. Hospitals always stayed the same on paper, but people inside them never forgot nights like this. Then she left. No escort, no announcement, no spotlight, only the quiet sound of doors closing behind her as the emergency wing returned fully to routine operations. Inside St. Gabriel Medical Center, new shifts would begin in a few hours. Doctors would continue rounds. Nurses would continue care, patients would continue healing, and most of them would never know the full truth of what happened before sunrise, only that a night of impossible coordination had ended without collapse, and that somewhere in the building a quiet trauma nurse had once stood between chaos and survival, and chosen not to be seen for it.